Never got lucky with girls. In fact, just last night, a hooker made me say please. And I can't drink. I'm a bad drinker.
You a bad drinker?
I'm a bad drinker. No idea what a bad drinker I am, Johnny. When I drink, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm telling you, I mix them up. I went out for dinner the other night, had a few drinks before dinner. The waiter came over. I ordered roast beef on the rocks. I tell you, Johnny, I count my blessings.
Count your blessings.
Count my blessings.
As long as you have your health.
That's what count your blessings. No, got to count your blessings,
everything.
Johnny. Got to count your blessings. Thank heaven I'm doing okay today, and I had it tough for years, you know.
Yeah,
so I paid a lot of dues, Johnny. Worked a lot of tough joints, you know. Fonzo's Knuckle Room, remember that?
Fonzo's Knuckle Room?
Oh, he was tough, Fonzo. Was he tough? Oh, Fonzo, he's the first one. He started acupuncture, you know. Yeah, with an ice pick. Oh,
Good morning. It's Monday, Medal of Honor Monday, March the 18th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and the Medal of Honor. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Heart of Texas, back in 1835, they drew a line in the sand. The folks of Gonzales had freedom on their minds. It was all because of a cannon that had kept their colony safe. But then General Santa Anna sent some Mexican troops to take the big gun away. You know what those colonists said? Come and take it if you want it. Come and take it if you think you can. Come and take it, but we'll warn you. You'll have to pry from our cold dead hands. We want the freedom that God gave us, so you best not cross that line. If you want this gun, you gotta come through us and take it one shot at a time. That started a revolution that no one could put down, like a wildfire for freedom. It's burning even now. You see, even if you got an army, when all is said and done, you just don't mess with Texas, especially when it comes to guns. The Mexicans went home without that cannon. Come and take it if you want it. Come and take it if you think you can. Come and take it, but we'll warn you. You'll have to pry it from our cold dead hands. We want the freedom that God gave us, so you best not cross that line. If you want this gun, you gotta come through us and take it one shot at a time. I know the Constitution, and it gives me certain rights that I will never, ever give up, at least not without a fight. So if anybody's even thinking they're gonna take my guns away, like the good old boys down in Gonzales, I got one thing to say. Come on, make my day. Come and take it if you want it. Come and take it if you think you can. Come and take it, but I warn you, you'll have to pry it from our cold dead hands. We want the freedom that God gave us, so you best not cross that line. If you want this gun, you gotta come through us and take it one shot at a time.
Thank you. Now, a little bit of Mafia action.
So can you give us an idea of what the Colombo family was in New York?
Well, I always say that the golden years of the mob in America, of course, in Austrian America, were really from the late 40s right through to the mid 80s. So my dad, throughout the 60s, I really got involved in the life in 1970. I became a made member in 1975, so I was in the midst of what I call the golden years. And the Colombo, there's 5 families in New York, and the Colombo family is one of the smaller ones. We had about 115 made guys. We had a lot of associates, but guys that actually took the oath. I mean, look, it was a real deal. It was during a time in New York where we had a lot of power and a lot of control. We controlled all the unions. We had a lot of political power, and we had a lot of power on the street, so I was in the midst of all of that. And that was a time when, Joe Colombo, Carmine Persico, who was my boss, Fat Tony Salerno, the boss of the Genovese, Paul Castellano, John Gotti. That was the era.
We're doing illegal gambling, casino nights, and illegal bingo games, which was big down there because of the elderly population. You can make a lot of money running bingo because they were taking the big cut for themselves.
On the aisle of the church, and some guy, now understand, I'm in New York, I'm watching everybody there, a lot of shady guys in New York, know how I'm met, but some guy comes up to me and he's got this look on his face and he puts his hands on my shoulders and he stops me. He says, "Michael, I have to tell you something." I said, "What?" He said, "When you repeated that oath, I had a vision of Satan standing behind you with his hands on your shoulders, looking up at the heavens and saying, 'I'll show you what born again means. I got one of yours.'" And I got the chills. I never thought of it this way.
So for a couple of days, you sit down there. Well, when he just walked in the door, when he arrived down there, it was like, I don't know, the biggest celebrity known to mankind walked in there. Every inmate that could see him or hear him or knew that he could hear them pledged that they would do anything that he wanted. Do you need anything? Anything that I have, you can have. That was pretty much the thing. And he walked in there like this super celebrity guy, just kind of nodding his head, "Yeah, okay, thank you, and I'll keep that in mind," and that sort of thing. And he went to his cell, and we put him in his cell, took the cuffs off of him. And for the rest of the evening, all you could hear was about how much I think you're a great guy, and we love you, and it was just on and on like that.
Well, even though my brother had a severe drug problem, but we never expected it to go to that level. And I was at the trial when my brother was testifying. It was like, is this really happening, And my brother was in the witness protection program, so like 10 years I didn't see him after that. I had his 70th birthday 2 years ago, and my wife invited him, and because he was out of the program, and I was like stunned when I seen him. He showed up. I didn't know. It was a surprise for me. But, I got to be honest, Brian, my brother sat down with me, and he said, "I don't know if you understand the torture that we went through as a family." And, look, I had a sister died of an overdose of drugs. My younger sister, 41 years old, she was never mentally stable. She passed away at 41. My mother dies 33 years without her husband. Our life at the end was a mess. And then my brother's drugs testified that it's destructive to the family. Profaci died in the early 60s, so that was before I hit the street. And my dad, my grandfather was a very well-known guy in Brooklyn. He had a kind of a social club, and some of the made guys would hang out there. My father was an amateur boxer. He caught their eye. He kind of liked the street life, and that's how it happened. My grandfather did not want him to get involved, tried to discourage him, but Dad made his own choice. So on July 26, 1981, Donnie Brasco disappears from the mob, returns to the FBI. He receives a $500 bonus for all the years of risking his life, $500. So there wasn't any great reward here. All right, later on, he got a movie, he got a book deal, but, who knew that was coming? He didn't know that. He did.
And that was a little bit of Mafia. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the patriotic shorts.
At 17, he got his parents' permission to enlist in the Army Air Force during World War II. He wanted to follow his older brother Jimmy, who was about to ship off to Europe and would eventually see action at Anzio. His name was Peter Ornish, though the world would come to know him as Peter Graves, a staple of television and film for over 5 decades. Corporal Graves flew dozens of missions in the Pacific and was awarded the American Campaign and World War II Victory Medals. Upon returning stateside, he again followed his big brother's lead, joining James Arness in Hollywood. Before James broke through as Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke, it was Peter who hit it big with his role as Price, the stoolie in the iconic World War II film Stalag 17. Filming the climactic scene, a nervous Graves leaned on friend and fellow war hero Neville Brand to calm his jitters. "There's nothing to be jumpy about. It's just acting," Brand gently reminded Graves between takes. "It's much easier than dodging bullets."
A Nigerian Air Force pilot was taking his MiG-21 fish bed up and over a series of giant floodlights during an air show when, without warning, he suddenly blacked out. At that point, several things could have happened next. Flying high above the crowd of spectators, the fish bed could have stalled, in which case it would have plunged downward and crashed. It could have continued on its path and collided with the towering lights, which would have had a similarly deadly result, not to mention what would happen if it descended toward the crowd. While some modern fighter jets have systems that automatically take control of the aircraft when G-lock occurs, the fish bed, a Soviet-era aircraft, does not. That means a fishbed pilot has only his training to rely on for protection. Often, that's simply not enough to avoid tragic accidents. In this case, however, the Nigerian pilot was lucky. He regained consciousness within moments, and even luckier, the fishbed managed to avoid stalling during the time he was blacked out, thereby avoiding a potentially catastrophic accident.
We set up a machine gun and started firing, and we must have fired maybe 50 rounds, and something hit our gun and blew up. I think it was probably an anti-tank gun, because I got shot in the face, and the gunner, he got shot in the chest. And in the meantime, my eyes started closing from the impact of the explosion. And so I couldn't see for about 2 days out of my left eye.
That deployment date ended, and I'm by myself. I didn't fly home with the team. My wife met me at the green ramp when I landed. There was nobody there. Damn. How was it coming home to your wife? I was a broken dude. I didn't know her. It was 8 months since I saw her. I was at a Best Buy. This guy in this BMW starts cruising by. He's smoking cloves. There was an Indian restaurant that was just a couple buildings away. I could smell the curry, and I could smell his clove. He was listening to some Arabic music. Then he's in a bad guy's car, and I was thinking about just smoking this dude in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I've been home 3 days, and I was I'm going to go back to my house for a few days. Some of my teammates, they knew and had heard what that deployment was like for me. When I'd call back to give them updates to my team sergeant, I called Alex. "Hey, boss, just want to give you an update. I'm back." He's like, "Hey, man, I heard. I'm getting updates every single day on the red side. First of all, I just want you to know that I'm super proud of you." That was the first time that I felt like I belonged there. It was because of Alex.
On January 21st, 1945, while steaming off the coast of Formosa, a Japanese plane emerged from the clouds and plunged toward USS Ticonderoga. The plane crashed through her flight deck just aft of the forward elevator, and its bomb exploded just above her hangar deck. With death and destruction surrounding them, the ship's company fought valiantly to save their threatened carrier, while their skipper, Captain Dixie Kiefer, conned his ship brilliantly. He changed course to keep the wind from fanning the blaze. Then, he ordered magazines and other compartments flooded to prevent further explosions and to correct a 10-degree list. Firefighters and plane handlers doused the flames and jettisoned burning aircraft. A second plane then slipped through her AA barrage and smashed into the carrier's starboard side near her island. But her crew refused to submit. They brought her fires under control by late in the afternoon, and Ticonderoga retired to fight another day.
What killed the most U.S. military personnel in the last 20 years is not what you think. With the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, you'd think the most U.S. military casualties were caused in combat. But between 2006 and 2021, about 2,700 were killed in action, while a whopping 6,200 deaths occurred due to accidents. Some accidents are a product of too much physical training, like in the case of Kyle Mullen, a star football player from Yale University, who joined the Navy with the hopes of becoming a Navy SEAL. But following the Hell Week portion of the SEAL training, he developed pneumonia and died. Hell Week is a 5.5-day event that involves sleep deprivation, hypothermia, physiological pressures, and grueling physical tests to evaluate candidates' capacity to become a Navy SEAL. In Kyle's case, his instructors failed him by not recognizing the signs and dangers of his condition. Another type of accidents are the ones caused by mechanical problems due to maintenance issues or operator error. Why the French catapult their aircraft faster than Americans is not by choice, and it's not what you think. The French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle uses 2 catapults, which are in fact American-built, and allow the ship to launch a 25-ton aircraft in just under 2 seconds at a speed of 145 knots. The thing is, the flight deck of Charles de Gaulle is 27% shorter than its American counterparts, so that also impacted the catapults. At only 246 feet long, these catapults are significantly shorter than the 310-foot-long catapults on the American supercarriers. This means that the aircraft launched from Charles de Gaulle have to be accelerated faster, which is why they experience 4 to 5 Gs of acceleration compared to American pilots that undergo 3 to 4 Gs during takeoff.
Did you kill anybody as a sniper? Yeah, a lot. Can we talk about the first one? Yeah. It was a child carrying a 1875 lever action British rifle, and he was moving in resupply points between this Taliban machine gun position. I didn't know how old he was. 500-600 meters, hours of limited visibility. I see a guy with a gun. I shot him. Very rarely do you get to go and see the people you shoot as a sniper. I come and I see this 11, 12-year-old kid with a rifle. I have this gun hanging on my wall. It's not a war trophy. It's not even functional. Right underneath it is the CENTCOM permission from the JAG. It reminds me of 2 things. One is every time I hear a politician say, like, why do you need a gun? And the second is to remind me of the cost of war. It's never the way that you want it to be. It's never the way that it is in the movies. It is horrible. I don't want my son to ever have to shoot an 11-year-old kid carrying a gun that doesn't even work. That's war.
He was only 19 years old when he was called up for national service. He was assigned to the 1st Battalion Royal Fusiliers, a storied infantry regiment that dated back to 1685. His name was Maurice Joseph Micklewhite, and in 1952 his unit was deployed to the Samashon River Valley region of Korea, what today would be considered the demilitarized zone. It was there that Micklewhite and 2 buddies were ambushed and outnumbered by an onslaught of North Korean and Chinese soldiers who were threatening to overrun their unit's tenuous position. Instead of falling back, the 3 decided to counterattack the enemy, though outnumbered 36 to 3. If we die, we'll bloody take out as many of them as we can, Micklewhite barked to the others. They miraculously survived the battle and the war. Maurice Joseph Micklewhite would relive the experience 4 years later in the movie A Hill in Korea, his first professional acting gig, under his stage name, Michael Caine.
This is the German Panzer III, one of the most well-known tanks of the Second World War. Development started in the 30s, but the initial models of the Panzer III faced numerous problems, especially with its suspension system. It took many versions until a design was found which ironed out the issues. When production finally started, the process was slow, and by September 1939, barely 180 had been built. It was designed to house the 37mm anti-tank gun, which quickly became outclassed. But a 50mm gun was eventually added 18 months later. After Operation Barbarossa, the Panzer III struggled against Soviet tanks like the T-34, and by this point, the Panzer III couldn't be upgraded any further. It could no longer effectively fight against enemy armor, so its production came to an end. However, the chassis did continue to see use in the Stug 3, a vehicle that went on to be one of the most important and effective armored fighting vehicles for Germany during the war.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of motivation.
Today we will talk about an important topic inspired by the teachings of Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, better known as Padre Pio. He has left us precious advice on how to protect our home and spirit from negative influences. We will explore the 3 individuals you should never allow into your home, according to some valuable teachings of this beloved saint. This video is the result of interpreting the writings, experiences, and imprints left by Padre Pio. Let's start with the first person, the dishonest person. The first person to keep away from your home is the one who practices dishonesty and malice as daily rituals. Padre Pio reminds our hearts that truth and honesty are fundamental in our lives. Every day, we choose to associate with people who operate with uprightness and honesty, avoiding those who could compromise our integrity and faith. Keep the latter away from your home. The second person to keep out of your home is the negative person. This person carries an aura of negativity and pessimism. Padre Pio teaches us that positivity and hope are fundamental elements in our relationship with God and others. Surround yourself with individuals who bring light and inspiration into your life, rather than those who sow doubts and darkness in your soul. The third person you should not allow into your home is the one without respect for faith. This person lacks respect for your faith, path, and spiritual beliefs. Padre Pio taught that it is essential to preserve and nurture our relationship with God. Accept those who respect your faith and protect yourself from those who question or disdain it. Don't invite them into your home. Let us remember the wise words of Padre Pio, that the protection and love of God accompany us in every decision of our daily lives. Thank you for watching this video. May the peace and grace of God be with you.
Perseverance is a great element of success. If you only knock long enough and loud enough at the gate, you are sure to wake up somebody. It takes less time to do a thing right than to explain why you did it wrong. Music is the universal language of mankind. In character, in manner, in style, in all things, the supreme excellence is simplicity. The best thing one can do when it's raining is to let it rain. Give what you have. To someone, it may be better than you dare to think. Art is the child of nature in whom we trace the features of the mother's face. If you like the message of this video, leave your comment, writing which quote you like the most.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the daily laws for March 17th and 18th.
March 17th. These powers can't come cheaply. To create a meaningful work of art, or to make a discovery or invention, requires great discipline, self-control, and emotional stability. It requires mastering the forms of your field. Drugs and madness only destroy such powers. Do not fall for the romantic myths and cliches that abound in culture about creativity, offering us the excuse or panacea that such powers can come cheaply. When you look at the exceptionally creative work of masters, you must not ignore the years of practice, the endless routines, the hours of doubt, and the tenacious overcoming of obstacles these people endured. Daily law. Creative energy is the fruit of the master's efforts and nothing else. Do not fall for the romantic myths. Mastery, Chapter 5. Awaken the dimensional mind, the creative active. March 18th. The power of desire and determination. When I was younger, I worked at a publisher's house in New York. One of the people we published was Toni Morrison. It was her first novel. I'll never forget the story. Toni Morrison worked as an editor at this publication house. She worked until 6 or 7 p.m., then took the train home to where she lived in Connecticut. She was raising 2 children. She would go home, cook the meals, put them to bed, and at 11 p.m., she would sit down and write. And that's how she wrote her first novel. That's the kind of energy and determination you have to have. I always thought that was superhuman. I know I could never do that, but look at who she became. It's because she wanted it so badly. Daily law. To rise to the level of mastery requires intense dedication. You have to really want it. What would make you have such commitment and dedication? Robert Greene in conversation at Live Talks Los Angeles, February 11th, 2019.
And that was the Daily Laws for March 17th and 18th from The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Friendship, in the most authentic sense, is born of and is fed by and leads to virtue. So for Aristotle, you're really a friend only with someone who shares with you a commitment to virtue and in whom you recognize the very virtue that you want to embody in your own life. Aristotle talks about a friendship of pleasure. Now, what's that? Well, it's a friend from whom you derive good feelings. It's the person you like to hang out with. They got a good sense of humor. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's friendship in a very mitigated way. There's also, he says, the friendship of utility. He said, I have a barber who's very good, cuts my hair well, and we're friendly. I mean, we chit-chat, we talk. He's useful to me. I get a good haircut from him. It's a friendship of utility. The real friendship is what Aristotle calls this friendship of virtue. That means together we're in love with the life of virtue. We recognize the goodness of one another, and we desire not our own good, but the good of the friend.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "The foundation of any culture, the source responsible for all its manifestations, is its philosophy. What does modern philosophy offer us? Virtually the only point of agreement among today's leading philosophers is that there is no such thing as philosophy, and that this knowledge constitutes their claim to the title of philosophers." Unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
Chapter 20. Maneuver them into weakness. The ripening for the sickle strategy. No matter how strong you are, fighting endless battles with people is exhausting, costly, and unimaginative. Wise strategists generally prefer the art of maneuver. Before the battle even begins, they find ways to put their opponents in positions of such weakness that victory is easy and quick. Bait enemies into taking positions that may seem alluring, but are actually traps and blind alleys. If their position is strong, get them to abandon it by leading them on a wild goose chase. Create dilemmas. Devise maneuvers that give them a choice of ways to respond, all of them bad. Channel chaos and disorder in their direction. Confused, frustrated, and angry opponents are like ripe fruit on the bough. The slightest breeze will make them fall. Maneuver warfare. Throughout history, two distinct styles of warfare can be identified. The most ancient is the war of attrition. The enemy surrenders because you have killed so many of its men. A general fighting a war of attrition will calculate ways to overwhelm the other side with larger numbers, or with the battle formation that will do the most damage, or with superior military technology. In any event, victory depends on wearing down the other side in battle. Even with today's extraordinary technology, attrition warfare is remarkably unsophisticated, playing into humanity's most violent instincts. Over many centuries, and most notably in ancient China, a second method of waging war developed. The emphasis here was not destroying the other side in battle, but weakening and unbalancing it before the battle began. The leader would maneuver to confuse and infuriate,
and to put the enemy in a bad position, having to fight uphill, or with the sun or wind in its face, or in a cramped space. In this kind of war, an army with mobility could be more effective than one with muscle. The maneuver warfare philosophy was codified by Sun Tzu in his Art of War, written in China's Warring States period in the 5th to 3rd century BC. Over 200 years of escalating cycles of warfare in which a state's very survival depended on its army and strategists. To Sun Tzu and his contemporaries, it was obvious that the costs of war went far beyond its body counts. It entailed a loss of resources and political goodwill, and a lowering of morale among soldiers and citizens. These costs would mount over time, until eventually even the greatest warrior nation would succumb to exhaustion. But through adroit maneuvering, a state could spare itself such high costs and still emerge victorious. An enemy who had been maneuvered into a weak position would succumb more easily to psychological pressure. Even before the battle had begun, it had imperceptibly started to collapse and would surrender with less of a fight. Several strategists outside Asia, most notably Napoleon Bonaparte, have made brilliant use of maneuver warfare. But in general, attrition warfare is deeply ingrained in the Western way of thinking, from the ancient Greeks to modern America. In an attrition culture, thoughts naturally gravitate toward how to overpower problems, obstacles, those who resist us. In the media, emphasis is placed on big battles, whether in politics or in the arts, static situations in which there are winners and losers. People are drawn to the emotional and dramatic quality in any confrontation, not the many steps that lead to such confrontation. The stories that are told in such cultures are all geared toward such battle-like moments, a moral message preached through the ending, as opposed to the more telling details. On top of it all, this way of fighting is deemed more manly, honorable, honest. More than anything, maneuver war is a different way of thinking. What matters here is process, the steps toward battle, and how to manipulate them to make the confrontation less costly and violent. In the maneuver universe, nothing is static. Battles are, in fact, dramatic illusions, short moments in the larger flow of events, which is fluid, dynamic, and susceptible to alteration through careful strategy. This way of thinking finds no honor or morality in wasting time, energy, and lives in battle. Instead, wars of attrition are seen as lazy, reflecting the primitive human tendency to fight back reactively without thinking. In a society full of attrition fighters, you will gain an instant advantage by converting to maneuver. Your thought process will become more fluid, more on the side of life, and you will be able to thrive off the rigid, battle-obsessed tendencies of the people around you. By always thinking first about the overall situation and about how to maneuver people into positions of weakness rather than fight them, you will make your battles less bloody, which, since life is long and conflict is endless, is wise if you want a fruitful and enduring career. And a war of maneuver is just as decisive as a war of attrition. Think of weakening your enemies as ripening them like grain, ready to be cut down at the right moment. The following are the 4 main principles of maneuver warfare. Craft a plan with branches. Maneuver warfare depends on planning, and the plan has to be right. Too rigid, and you leave yourself no room to adjust to the inevitable chaos and friction of war. Too loose, and unforeseen events will confuse and overwhelm you. The perfect plan stems from a detailed analysis of the situation, which allows you to decide on the best direction to follow or the perfect position to occupy, and suggests several effective options, branches, to take, depending on what the enemy throws at you. A plan with branches lets you outmaneuver your enemy because your responses to changing circumstances are faster and more rational. Give yourself room to maneuver. You cannot be mobile, you cannot maneuver freely, if you put yourself in cramped spaces or tie yourself down to positions that do not allow you to move. Consider the ability to move and keeping open more options than your enemy has as more important than holding territories or possessions. You want open space, not dead positions. This means not burdening yourself with commitments that will limit your options. It means not taking stances that leave you nowhere to go. The need for space is psychological as well as physical. You must have an unfettered mind to create anything worthwhile. Give your enemy dilemmas, not problems. Most of your opponents are likely to be clever and resourceful. If your maneuvers simply present them with a problem, they will inevitably solve it. But a dilemma is different. Whatever they do, however they respond, retreat, advance, stay still, they are still in trouble. Make every option bad. If you maneuver quickly to a point, for instance, you can force your enemies either to fight before they are ready or to retreat. Try constantly to put them in positions that seem alluring but are traps. Create maximum disorder. Your enemy depends on being able to read you, to get some sense of your intentions. The goal of your maneuvers should be to make that impossible, to send the enemy on a wild goose chase for meaningless information, to create ambiguity as to which way you are going to jump. The more you break down people's ability to reason about you, the more disorder you inject into their system. The disorder you create is controlled and purposeful, at least for you. The disorder the enemy suffers is debilitating and destructive. By Sun Tzu. So, to win 100 victories in 100 battles is not the highest excellence. The highest excellence is to subdue the enemy's army without fighting at all. Historical examples. 1. On November 10, 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte completed the coup d'etat that brought him to power as first consul, giving him near complete control of the French state. For over 10 years, France had been convulsed with revolution and war. Now that Napoleon was leader, his most pressing need was peace, to give the country time to recoup and himself time to consolidate his power. But peace would not come easily. France had a bitter enemy in Austria, which had put 2 large armies in the field ready to move against Napoleon, one to the east of the Rhine and the other in northern Italy, under General Michael Melas. The Austrians were clearly planning a major campaign. Waiting was too dangerous. Napoleon had to seize the initiative. He had to defeat at least one of these armies if he were to force Austria to negotiate peace on his terms. The one trump card he had was that several months earlier, a French army had gained control of Switzerland. There were also French troops in northern Italy, which Napoleon had taken from the Austrians several years earlier. To plan for the first real campaign under his direction, Napoleon holed himself up in his office for several days. His secretary, Louis de Bourrienne, would recall seeing him lying on giant maps of Germany, Switzerland, and Italy laid out wall to wall on the floor. The desks were piled high with reconnaissance reports. On hundreds of note cards organized into boxes, Napoleon had calculated the Austrians' reactions to the feints he was planning. Muttering to himself on the floor, he mulled over every permutation of attack and counterattack. By the end of March 1800, Napoleon had emerged from his office with a plan for a campaign in northern Italy that went far beyond anything his lieutenants had ever seen before. In the middle of April, a French army under General Jean Moreau would cross the Rhine and push the Eastern Austrian army back into Bavaria. Then Napoleon would lead a 50,000-man force, already in place in Switzerland, into northern Italy through several different passes in the Alps. Moreau would then release one of his divisions to move south and follow Napoleon into Italy. Moreau's initial move into Bavaria and the subsequent scattered dispatch of divisions into Italy would confuse the Austrians as to Napoleon's intentions. And if the Austrian army at the Rhine was pushed east, it would be too distant to support the Austrian army in northern Italy. Once across the Alps, Napoleon would concentrate his forces and link up with the divisions under General André Masséna, already stationed in northern Italy. He would then move much of his army to the town of Stradella, cutting off communications between Melas in northern Italy and command headquarters in Austria. With Melas's troops now isolated and the mobile French army within reach of them, Napoleon would have many excellent options for dislocating and destroying them. At one point, as he described this plan to Bourrienne, Napoleon lay down on the giant map on his floor and stuck a pin next to the town of Marengo, in the center of the Italian theater of war. "I will fight him here," he said. A few weeks later, as Napoleon began to position his armies, he received some troubling news. Melas had beaten him to the punch by attacking Masséna's army in northern Italy. Masséna was forced back to Genoa, where the Austrians quickly surrounded him. The danger here was great. If Masséna surrendered, the Austrians could sweep into southern France. Also, Napoleon had been counting on Masséna's army to help him beat Melas. Yet he took the news with surprising calm and simply made some adjustments. He transferred more men to Switzerland and sent word to Masséna that he must do whatever he could to hold out for at least 8 weeks, keeping Melas busy while Napoleon moved into Italy. Within a week, there was more irritating news. After Moreau had begun the campaign to push the Austrians back from the Rhine, he refused to transfer the division that Napoleon had counted on for Italy, claiming he could not spare it. Instead, he sent a smaller, less experienced division. The French army in Switzerland had already begun the dangerous crossings through the Alps. Napoleon had no choice but to take what Moreau gave him. By May 24th, Napoleon had brought his army safely into Italy. Absorbed with the siege at Genoa, Melas ignored reports of French movements to the north. Next, Napoleon advanced to Milan, close to Stradella, where he cut Austrian communications as planned. Now, like a cat stealing up on its prey, he could wait for Melas to notice the trap he was in and try to fight his way out of it near Milan. On June 8th, however, once again, more bad news reached Napoleon. 2 weeks before he had hoped, Masséna had surrendered. Napoleon now had fewer men to work with, and Melas had won a strong base in Genoa. Since its inception, the campaign had been plagued with mistakes and unforeseen events. The Austrians attacking early, Masséna retreating into a trap at Genoa, Moreau disobeying orders, and now Masséna's surrender. Yet while Napoleon's lieutenants feared the worst, Napoleon himself not only stayed cool, he seemed oddly excited by these sudden twists of fortune. Somehow, he could discern opportunities in them that were invisible to everyone else. And with the loss of Genoa, he sensed the greatest opportunity of all. He quickly altered his plan. Instead of waiting at Milan for Melas to come to him, he suddenly cast his divisions in a wide net to the west. Watching his prey closely, Napoleon sensed that Melas was mesmerized by the movements of the French divisions. A fatal hesitation. Napoleon moved one division west to Marengo, close to the Austrians at Genoa, almost baiting them to attack. Suddenly, on the morning of June 14th, they took the bait, and in surprising force. This time it was Napoleon who had erred. He had not expected the Austrian attack for several days, and his divisions were scattered too widely to support him. The Austrians at Marengo outnumbered him 2-1. He dispatched urgent messages in all directions for reinforcement, then settled into battle, hoping to make his small forces hold ground until they came. The hours went by with no sign of aid. Napoleon's lines grew weaker, and at 3 p.m, the Austrians finally broke through, forcing the French to retreat. This was the ultimate downturn in the campaign, and it was yet again Napoleon's moment to shine. He seemed encouraged by the way the retreat was going, the French scattering and the Austrians pursuing them without discipline or cohesion. Riding among the men who had retreated the farthest, he rallied them and prepared them to counterattack, promising them that reinforcements would arrive within minutes. And he was right. Now French divisions were coming in from all directions. The Austrians, meanwhile, had let their ranks fall into disorder. And stunned to find themselves facing new forces in this condition, they halted and then gave ground to a quickly organized French counterattack. By 9:00 p.m., the French had routed them. Just as Napoleon had predicted with his pin on the map, he met and defeated the enemy at Marengo. A few months later, a treaty was signed that gave France the peace it so desperately needed. A peace that was to last nearly 4 years.
And that was the beginning part of Chapter 20, Maneuver Them into Weakness, from the 33 Strategies of War. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, a right-thinking Democrat, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican. We are the true party of government. We are the ones that love government. The Democrat Party just loves power. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Ben Shapiro in front of Congress speaking to a Democrat congresswoman. Let's see, where is that? Right over here.
Understanding that white privilege is not telling individuals that they cannot speak, but it is a term for societal privilege that individuals have as a benefit of their white skin. And I don't think that, and I think universities would be remiss to then say that because you're white, you're not allowed to say anything that's critical of white people. I didn't know that white privilege actually went into that sphere. My understanding is it's just, and the issue is that white privilege makes people uncomfortable to talk about the societal privilege that they have.
Well, to me, what I say on campuses all the time is if you want to cite instances of racism that we can all find and fight together, that's something that I'm more than willing to stand next to you and fight, because that's obviously stuff that we should fight together. But when you just say that there is a white privilege out there in the ether and that by dint of birth your skin color generates for you an advantage, what you're really saying to people is that your view is less valuable because you have not experienced what I've experienced. And that is an identity argument, that's a character argument, that's not a rational political argument that can actually be taken on in any way. It's more of a cudgel and a club than it is an attempt to open a discussion.
Well, I think it's
Okay, so that's enough of that. So first, she comes up with white privilege. So his first part of the answer was excellent, absolutely excellent, where he says if you want to basically get rid of racism, I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with you and do that. And what did he do there when he did that? What he did was he equivocated. Instead of talking about white privilege, he talked about racism, because white privilege is part of the overall discussion of racism. Racism is part of the overall discussion of civil rights. So what she's doing is basically saying she's putting you in a false dichotomy. The essence of a false dichotomy is you're either for me, or you're actually either with me or you're against me. And in a false dichotomy, there's other options. And Ben Shapiro just demonstrated what that other option is. Instead of having an argument about the specifics, you generalize. And if it was a general issue where she's trying to trap you, then you could go ahead and argue the specifics. Okay, and so what happens here for Ben Shapiro, it sounds like he's answering her question or responding to her remark, when in reality, not really. He's not providing a specific response or answer to her specific issue. Okay, but that's the thing that the left does all the time. So it's fair game. The rest of his answer was gibberish. It was absolute gibberish and worthless. He's got to remember that when he's speaking, whether it's in front of Congress, anytime he's speaking in public, on his show, in front of Congress, he is setting an example for other would-be conservatives. And that he needs to make sure that he's able to keep his answers short, to the point, short and pithy and to the point. Because that way, other conservatives can pick up on that and use that when they go to work. Because what this lady is also doing is sending out talking points. So that when you go to work, you're going to hear about white privilege. You're going to have the useful idiots in your office are going to show up in the break room and ask you about white privilege. What do you say? Well, you don't want to have to memorize 30, 60 seconds, 2 minutes worth of dialogue. You need something that's short, pithy, to the point. So when he says, hey, I'll battle racism with you shoulder to shoulder, that's the takeaway. That's the talking point or counter talking point to use in this particular situation. So Mr. Shapiro was half right. He got the first part of it right. The rest of it he should have just kept in his pocket. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Medal of Honor.
Chapter 6, Corporal Herschel W. Williams. It is not only in movies that a single soldier is capable of charging towards enemy lines alone and successfully demolishes their position. Corporal Herschel Williams' Medal of Honor citation alone speaks for his bravery and effective leadership during the war on Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands, Japan. Marking another victory for the American troops, the Battle of Iwo Jima enabled the United States to capture the aforementioned island from the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. The invasion also seized 3 Japanese-controlled airfields that were later on used as strategic bases for launching attacks that targeted the mainlands of Japan. According to the observation of war analysts, the outcome of Japan being defeated by America in the Battle of Iwo Jima was inevitable right from the start. There was a huge gap between the quantity of their armed forces, ships, and tanks between the two forces. Japan's troops had a total of around only 22,060 men, and this was not enough for them to be able to withstand America's 70,000 Marines, Navy corpsmen, and Air Forces combined. With clashes lasting from February 19th to March 26, 1945, the 5-week battle was considered as one of the most intense and bloodiest among those fought in the Pacific. It left 6,821 dead and 19,217 wounded for the American troops, while Japan suffered 18,844 killed and 216 captured soldiers. Born on October 2, 1923, Williams lived at a dairy farm in Fairmont, West Virginia. Before becoming a Marine, he was once a truck driver and a farmer as well. He always believed that this would be his career for the rest of his life. However, some of the men in his community did not share the same pessimism and joined the United States Marine Corps for better wages. Whenever they came home, Williams couldn't help but be attracted by their blue uniforms that spoke of pride and honor. It stood out wherever they went. I had no desire to go in the military. I'm going to be a farmer the rest of my life. But if I ever do, that's what I want to look like, Corporal Williams shared in an interview with the publication Stars and Stripes. He noticed the Marines' extraordinary politeness as they addressed every person as ma'am or sir. Despite not having the slightest idea what the war was all about, Williams was so enthralled by the Marines that he eventually joined the Corps. He received his first training as an official Marine Corps recruit at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, California. When Williams completed the offered course, he moved to a training center called Camp Elliott. Here he was able to join the Tank Training Battalion on August 21, 1943. Soon after, he shifted to the Training Center's Infantry Battalion, where he studied combat tactics of a demolition man and mastered instructions in the use of flamethrowers as well. On August 30th, 1943, Williams joined the 32nd Replacement Battalion and traveled to New Caledonia, located in the Southwest Pacific. A couple of months later, he was then reassigned to Guadalcanal, where he served as a pledged member of the 1st Battalion of the U.S. Marines. Moreover, Williams was also among the deployed American military men that fought against the Japanese forces at Guam on July and August 1944. When Japan launched its first attacks, he was with the Civilian Conservation Corps in the state of Montana, together with other young boys from varied states across the country. They all shared the aspiration to be renowned and successful soldiers someday. While standing in line, they were told that Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese forces and that America was at war. However, no one among them knew where Pearl Harbor was or what it was, so the news did not make sense to most of them. Apparently, during that time, Williams was still naive of how nations play the game of war despite the series of trainings he had already received. He thought that if you were part of the U.S. military forces, you would simply stay in America and defend it at all cost. No need to be deployed to other neighboring areas. From what he had heard from others, enemy troops were trying to take and challenge their nation's sovereignty, so Williams thought it best to stay home and adopt a defensive stance. However, he was then drafted to sail toward the South Pacific and fight the Japanese on their territory. It was a shock that he would continue his rendered service as an official part of the U.S. Marines on an island he never even knew existed. Williams and the rest of the members of their unit were not even briefed as to what the island of Iwo Jima was like. Not a single one of them had heard of it. They were simply shown a map of the island when they got aboard their ship. He thought it was relatively small as compared to their previous target, Guam. They were assured by their superior officer that they would simply function as a reserve. They might not even be needed to get off their ship and fight. This made them feel like they were simply going on a boat ride. None of them were anxious about the operation. Unfortunately, U.S. troops suffered great casualties on the first day of the battle. There were not enough Marines on the ground to sustain their offensive lines after the first wave of attacks. With this, the Reserve Corps, who were never expected to get off their ship, were ordered to prepare for combat and join the already deployed Marines. Upon landing, there was not enough room for the added Marines, since the first troops were not able to take enough ground as a base for the others. Williams and his colleagues were temporarily sent back to their ship, only to be deployed once again the following day. This time, they were surrounding the mountain of Suribachi, and there was already enough area along the beach's shore to shelter added men. Williams' unit was tasked with splitting the enemy lines to drive them in opposite directions where other Marines were waiting to commence ambush. He was a flamethrower operator then and in charge of demolition as well. Being a corporal, he took control of 6 other Marines as members of the Special Weapons Unit. On the 5th day of the battle, he completely lost his subordinates. They were wounded, they were killed. Their company lost a lot of squad leaders as well. When their commanding officer called for a meeting for high-ranking Marines, Williams was advised to attend, although he was only a corporal, being that so few leaders were left. In that meeting, they brainstormed as to how they could break through the concrete pillboxes that protected the Japanese lines. Such defensive structure was also adorned with artillery, bazookas, and mortars. For their general, the only way to get through was to burn it with a flamethrower or blow it up through demolition. Moreover, he saw Williams as the perfect man to carry out his plan. Williams was reluctant and anxious, but he still obeyed his superior anyway. Their general entrusted him with 4 Marines whose job was to cover him against Japanese soldiers as he was taking out the pillboxes. During the process, he lost 2 of them in an instant. They gave their life protecting mine. There was no way I could ever repay that, Williams said. As he was crawling up towards the pillbox, it started raining bullets on him, mostly hitting the air tank on his back. Fear kicked in and he thought of retreating, but stepping back would only put him in even deadlier fire. Go forward, he constantly told himself. As he fired his first flamethrower, he expected other Marines to automatically fetch another for him, but none seemed to be interested in joining him in the open field under fire. This forced him to make 6 trips back to their supply lines to get serviced flamethrowers and rush back to the enemy line to fire it. It went on for 4 hours, but with a clear goal of successfully breaking through set in Williams' mind, it didn't matter. Apart from this operation, he also exhibited bravery when he once charged toward a line of Japanese riflemen trying to push him back with their bayonets. As a counterattack, Williams destroyed their position with his flamethrower and succeeded once again. After the Battle of Iwo Jima, Williams and his troops still stayed in Japan. Engineers built makeshift buildings and streets for them to train on while waiting for further orders. Most lessons, according to Williams himself, concerns how a Marine can get near or enter an infrastructure without being detected. On the 9th of August, the U.S. bombed Nagasaki, Japan, and that signaled the end of the war. The American troops still deployed in Japan were rejoicing and eager to return home. In early September, Williams was summoned to the gunnery sergeant's office. They were still in the Pacific at the time. "You're going up to the headquarters to see the general," his superior told him. He ran through all the possible violations that he may have committed, still confused as to why he would be needed by such a high-ranking officer. Apparently, even the gunnery sergeant didn't know. His superiors even sent him a driver to pick him up. Upon reaching their destination, which he was not familiar with, his heart was still rapidly racing with anxiousness. He saw a colonel and snapped to attention as he delivered a salute. "You're going to see the general," the colonel responded as he escorted him inside the general's tent. He stood still and polite while the general unveiled big news for him. Williams was told he would be flown back to the United States. This alone delighted him because he had never been on a plane before, but what came next was a whole different level of confusion for the corporal. "You'll go to the White House and they are going to present you with a Medal of Honor." Williams never heard of the term Medal of Honor, so he simply listened and replied, "Yes, sir," on cue. In his flight back to America, he was aboard together with other soldiers from Japan, some recently released from captivity. Williams described them as close to skeletons, for their eyes and cheeks seemed hollowed. Despite their physical condition, he noticed that they just might be the happiest people he had ever seen. He happened to be seated beside a prisoner of war. Even in the military, they never received any information as to how enemies treat captured soldiers. Williams began to ask the prisoner about his experiences in Japan, most of them filled with stories of torture and mistreatment. "You'll never know what freedom is until you've lost it," the prisoner shared. After further travels by plane and train, Williams reached the U.S. Marine Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C. on the 1st of October. 4 days later, President Harry S. Truman himself presented him the Medal of Honor at the White House. He continued his military service even after receiving such a distinguished award. He served for various units in Maryland and West Virginia. Williams also advanced to being a warrant officer of several infantry companies until reaching his final rank of Chief Warrant Officer 4. He retired from the U.S. Marine Corps in 1969 after rendering approximately 17 years of service in total.
And that was Chapter 7 from World War II Heroes, Medal of Honor recipients, and their heroic stories of bravery. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.